Everyone knows the Vikings reached North America 5 centuries before Columbus. That part is settled, carved into the record by a working camp in Newfoundland and a date pinned to the exact year. But reaching a place and meeting the people who already lived there are two different things. And for that second claim, the proof never came. No grave, no shared artifact, nothing but old stories that historians dismissed as legend. Then, in the last few years, a strand of DNA surfaced in the one place on Earth it had no business being. A genetic signature that belongs to the first Americans, flowing through the veins of people on an island in the North Atlantic, carried down an unbroken line of mothers for 1,000 years. So here's the question. Who carried it there? The answer points to a single woman whose name no one will ever know. To understand why a single strand of DNA could rewrite the story, you first have to understand what the story already allows. And what it allows now is more than it once did. For most of the 20th century, the idea that Norse explorers reached North America sat in the same drawer as sea monsters and lost continents. A nice tale, not history. That drawer is closed now. The proof came out of the turf at the far northern tip of Newfoundland, a windswept place called Meadows, where excavations beginning in the 1960s uncovered something that could not be explained away. Beneath the soil lay the outlines of 8 buildings. Dwellings and workshops, their layout echoing not the Americas, but the halls of Greenland and Iceland. And the objects that came out of the ground left no room for argument. A ring-headed bronze pin of the kind used to fasten a Norse cloak, a soapstone spindle whorl for spinning wool, fragments of iron nails, and, decisively, a furnace heaped with iron slag, the unmistakable sign that whoever lived here was smelting iron from local bog ore. They were repairing ships. They were making tools. This was not a place someone stumbled onto and fled. It was a working camp, equipped and operational. For decades, the dating stayed frustratingly loose, a window of 60 years that no one could narrow. Then, in October of 2021, in a study published in the journal Nature, a team led by the chronologists Margot Kuitums and Michael D. at the University of Groningen did something nobody had managed before. They found the exact year. Their method was extraordinary. In the year 992 of the Common Era, a massive solar storm flooded the atmosphere with a sudden burst of radioactive carbon, a signal that trees everywhere locked into the ring they grew the following season. The team found pieces of wood from the site, all cut with metal blades the local population did not possess, and all carrying that storm signal exactly 29 rings in from the bark. The conclusion was inescapable. The trees were felled in the year 1021, 1,000 years ago, 471 years before Columbus. So the Vikings reached this continent. That much is no longer in question. But here the official story runs into the wall that this entire investigation is built on. Reaching a place and meeting the people who already lived there are two completely different claims. And the second one has never been proven. Look closely at what came out of that Newfoundland ground. Every artifact is Norse. The pin, the whorl, the nails, the slag, all of it carried across the ocean from the Norse world. Not one object is indisputably Native American. There is no shared grave, no clear physical record of two peoples standing face to face, trading, fighting, touching at all. The camp proves the Norse were there. It does not prove they were ever not alone. The sagas insist otherwise. Written down centuries after the events they describe, they tell of the Skraelings, the name the Norse gave the people they met, and of trade that soured into bloodshed on a foreign shore. For a long time, historians treated those passages exactly the way they once treated the voyages themselves. Folklore, embellishment, stories told around a fire and dressed up as memory. The sagas could not be evidence because there was nothing in the dirt to back them. And that is the gap at the center of everything that follows. On one side, hard proof that the Norse crossed the Atlantic and built on this continent. On the other, total silence on the question that matters most. Did they ever come home with more than timber and slag? Did anyone ever cross back the other way? That question would have stayed unanswerable, a matter of old manuscripts and educated guesses, if not for one stubborn fact. The proof, when it finally came, did not come from Newfoundland at all. It came from the blood of people still alive today. To find that proof, you have to leave Newfoundland behind and travel northeast, across nearly 2,000 miles of open ocean, to a volcanic island sitting alone in the North Atlantic. Iceland. And you have to understand something unusual about the people who live there, because that one detail is the reason this discovery was possible at all. Iceland is among the most genetically documented populations on Earth. It was settled in a single burst more than 1,100 years ago and stayed isolated for most of its history, a small population on a remote island that kept meticulous records of who descended from whom. Family lines run back through the centuries in writing. For a geneticist, it is something close to a perfect laboratory. So when scientists at a company called Decode Genetics set out to map the deep ancestry of their own people, they were not chasing Vikings or lost expeditions. They were doing the ordinary patient work of tracing where Icelandic maternal lines came from. And almost every line led exactly where it should. To the British Isles, to Scandinavia, the two wells from which the Icelandic population had always been drawn. The picture was clean, expected, confirmed 100 times over, until one thread refused to fit. A cluster of living Icelanders carried a maternal lineage that did not lead back to Britain or Norway. It did not lead anywhere in Europe at all. It pointed impossibly to the Americas. To understand why that single thread mattered so much, you have to understand the kind of DNA they were reading. There are two ways the body inherits its genetic record, and they behave very differently. Most of your DNA is a shuffle, half from your mother and half from your father, mixed and remixed every generation until the original strands are impossible to separate. But there is one piece that does not shuffle. It is called mitochondrial DNA, and it passes down only one road, from a mother to all of her children, unchanged. A man receives it from his mother, but he never passes it on. Only daughters carry it forward, and their daughters after them. Let that detail settle, because everything rests on it. Mitochondrial DNA is an unbroken female thread, a line you can follow backward in time without interruption, mother to mother to mother, until you arrive at one woman standing at its source. It does not blur, it does not dilute. It is the closest thing biology offers to a name written in permanent ink. So, this lineage in the Icelanders was not a stray fragment of ancestry, the kind of faint signal that might drift in from anywhere. It was a continuous maternal line, and it had to have entered the population through a single woman, somewhere back along the thread. The researchers gave the lineage a name, C1E, and they counted how many living people carried it. Roughly 80 Icelanders, all descended through their mothers and their mothers' mothers from the same distant origin. 80 people walking around a modern Nordic country with a genetic signature that, by every rule of how the world was supposed to have worked, belonged on the other side of an ocean their ancestors were never said to have crossed. The obvious response, the first one any careful scientist reaches for, was the unremarkable one. This was probably recent. Iceland is not sealed off from the modern world. People move, marry, settle. A woman from Asia, where related lineages are known to exist, could have arrived in the last century or two, married into an Icelandic family, and quietly seeded the line. No Vikings required, no mystery at all. Just ordinary modern migration, the kind that happens everywhere. It was the responsible explanation, and it was testable. Because in Iceland, unlike almost anywhere else on Earth, you can take a living person and follow their maternal line backward through written records, generation by generation, deep into the past. If C1E was a recent arrival, the genealogy would show it. The thread would run out somewhere in the 18 or 1900s and stop. So that is exactly what the researchers set out to do. They started pulling the thread. Pulling the thread meant doing something almost no other population on Earth would have allowed. The team at Decode turned to their genealogical database, the vast written record of Icelandic descent, and began tracing the carriers of C1E backward along their maternal lines, not guessing, not estimating, following actual names, mother to mother, through parish records and family registers that stretched back centuries. And to anchor the genetics with precision, they sequenced the complete mitochondrial genomes of 11 living carriers, reading the lineage down to its finest detail so they could be certain the people they were tracing all belonged to the same thread. What the records showed did not match the easy answer at all. The 11 carriers did not trace back to some recent immigrant arriving on a steamship. They traced back to 4 separate maternal lines, 4 matrilines, each one converging on a woman born in the same corner of Iceland between roughly 1710 and 1740. 4 different women, the same region of the South, the same early 18th century, and all 4 carrying a lineage that supposedly belonged on the far side of the Atlantic. Sit with what 4 converging lines actually mean, because this is where the recent immigrant theory quietly dies. If 4 separate matrilines all carry the same rare signature and all surface in the same small area at the same time, they are not 4 independent arrivals. They are branches. Branches grow from a trunk. The only sane reading is that all 4 women descended from a single common ancestral mother who came before them, a woman who had to have been born no later than 1700. And there is the problem that breaks the easy explanation in half. There were no Asian families settling in rural southern Iceland in the year 1699. There was no modern migration to seed this line. Whatever this woman was, she was already there, generations deep, long before anything in the modern world could account for her. So the date of 1700 became the latest possible moment the lineage could have entered Iceland, the newest the thread could be. And a latest possible date is a floor, not a ceiling. The genetics pushed the real origin further back still. Because of the way these lineages survive and branch and spread through a population over time, a line already split into 4 established matrilines by the early 1700s had almost certainly entered the gene pool long before then, not decades earlier. Centuries. And once you are counting in centuries backward from 1700, you arrive somewhere that should not be possible. You arrive in the neighborhood of the Viking Age. The same window, give or take, when Norse ships were crossing to the coast of North America and building their camp in Newfoundland. The 2 timelines approached from completely different directions. The genetics from one side and the archaeology from the other reach for the same stretch of years. This was the work of named researchers, and it is worth naming them, because the weight of the claim rests on who made it. The study was led by the Icelandic geneticist Sigríður Sunna Ebenezer Stóttir, working alongside Agnar Helgason, one of the leading figures in Icelandic population genetics, and the Spanish geneticist Carles Lalueza Fox, a specialist in ancient DNA. Their findings were published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. This was not folklore, and it was not a hopeful amateur reading meaning into a coincidence. It was a peer-reviewed genetics study built on one of the best genealogical records in the world, and every road they followed led backward to the same impossible place in time. The thread did not run out in the 1800s as a recent arrival would have. It did not stop at some convenient modern marriage. It ran deeper and deeper, past the steamships, past the parish records, into a past where the only people crossing between the Americas and the North Atlantic were sailing in open wooden ships with a single square sail. The question was no longer whether the lineage was old. It was old. The question was where exactly it had come from. And for that, they had to look at what C1E actually was. So, what is C1E? To answer that, you have to look at the family it belongs to, and the family tells a story all its own. C1E is a branch of a larger lineage called C1, and C1 is not an ordinary European marker. It is one of a small handful of founding mitochondrial lineages carried by the very first people to enter the Americas, the hunters who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia into an empty continent roughly 14,000 years ago. C1 is, in the deepest sense, an American signature. It belongs to the people who were here first, long before anyone in Europe knew there was a here at all, and it is almost unheard of in Europe. To find any branch of it in a Nordic population is like finding a desert flower blooming on a glacier. It simply does not belong. But the researchers found something stranger still when they looked closely at the Icelandic branch. They expected if it really was American, that it would match one of the known Native American versions of C1, the established subclades the science already recognized, the ones labeled C1b, C1c, and C1d. It matched none of them, nor did it match C1a, the branch known from Asia. The Icelandic lineage sat apart from every previously recorded member of the family. It was something no one had ever documented before, a brand new branch on the tree, and they gave it the name it now carries. C1e, a twig of its own, growing from the American side of the family, sharing the deep roots of the first Americans, but found nowhere among them. For the team, the most likely reading of all this pointed in one direction. A Norse voyage to the eastern coast of the Americas, around the year 1000, had brought home at least one woman who carried this lineage, a Native American woman crossing the ocean eastward into a world that did not yet know her continent existed. Let that settle, because behind the genetics is a person. Picture her. We will never know her name, her language, the people she was born to, or whether she went willingly or was taken. We know only the barest outline that biology preserves. She survived the North Atlantic crossing in an open wooden ship, a journey that killed seasoned Norse sailors. With no sail above her she had ever seen before and no shore behind her she would ever see again. She came ashore on a black volcanic island at the very edge of the known world, a place of ice and fire and a tongue she did not speak. And there, somehow, she lived. She had a daughter. That daughter had a daughter. And the unbroken thread of her, the one piece of her that does not blur or dilute, passed quietly from mother to mother down through 40 generations, through famines and plagues and centuries until it reached 80 people living in Iceland today who have no idea they are carrying her. And consider what that would make her if the reading holds. Not a footnote. The first Native American to set foot in Europe. She crossed to the other side of the world roughly 500 years before Columbus sailed in the opposite direction, 4 centuries before anyone in Europe even suspected the Americas were there to be found. The history books give the meeting of the two worlds a date and a man and a flag planted on a Caribbean beach in 1492. But if this woman is real, the two worlds had already met, already touched, already produced children together half a millennium before that beach. And the proof was not buried in any ruin. It was walking around a modern country, alive in the blood of its people. It is a clean story. It is an astonishing one. It is the kind of story that rewrites a chapter everyone thought was finished, which is exactly why it deserves the hardest possible look. Because the same scientists who proposed it were the first to admit it was not proven. And the moment you press on it, the certainty begins to thin. Here, honesty has to plant its feet, because the story that thrills is not the story that has been proven, and the gap between the two is wide. Start with the single hardest fact, the one the believers cannot easily get around. No living Native American population carries C1E, not one. The researchers searched the records, compared the Icelandic lineage against the great libraries of sequenced DNA from across the Americas, and found no match. The exact branch that turns up in 80 Icelanders has never once been found among the people it supposedly came from. It exists, as far as anyone can prove, only in Iceland. Think about how strange that is. If a Native American woman carried this lineage across the ocean 1,000 years ago, then by definition she belonged to a population back home that also carried it. Her mother had it, her sisters had it, her cousins had it. So where are they? Where are their descendants now? The believers have an answer, and it is not an unreasonable one. The centuries after European contact were catastrophic for Native American populations. Disease, displacement, and violence erased entire peoples, and with them, entire lineages. The specific group that carried C1E, they argue, may simply have been wiped out, taking its signature out of the Americas forever and leaving the Icelandic branch as the last surviving trace. It is plausible. But notice what it is. It is an absence asked to do the work of evidence. The lineage is missing exactly where it should be most common, and the explanation for that absence cannot itself be tested. You are believing in a people who left no one behind to confirm they existed. Then there is the second problem, and it is one the scientists raised themselves to their lasting credit. They never claim proof. Read this study carefully, and you find no triumphant declaration, no Native American woman presented as established fact. What you find instead is caution, stated plainly. A Native American origin, they wrote, seemed the most likely explanation for C1E, but an Asian origin could not be ruled out. Nor, they admitted, could a European one. The people closest to the discovery, the ones who knew it best, deliberately left all three doors open. They offered the Native American reading as a hypothesis, the strongest of several, not as a verdict. The certainty in the headline was never the certainty in the paper, and the third problem cuts at the foundation everything else is built on. Remember where the hard evidence actually stopped. The genealogy proved the lineage was present in Iceland by around 1700. That date is solid, anchored in written records, beyond serious dispute. But the year 1000, the Viking Age arrival, the woman in the open ship, all of that is inference. It is a reconstruction of what most likely happened in the centuries before the records begin, built on the mathematics of how lineages branch and spread. It is reasonable. It may well be right, but no one has ever held the proof of it. No remains from the Viking Age carrying C1E have ever been found and sequenced. No skeleton, no burial, nothing physical bridges the gap between the documented 1700 and the imagined 1000. 7 centuries of that thread are a line drawn through the dark, connecting a dot we can see to a dot we only assume is there. So lay it out honestly. The lineage is real. It is genuinely foreign to Iceland. It is genuinely old, older than any modern migration can explain. Those things are not in doubt. But the leap from there to a Native American woman crossing the Atlantic around the year 1000 is a leap, and the scientists who made it said so out loud. The believers see a captive carried home from a forest coast. The skeptics see a lineage that could have reached Iceland by other roads at other times, from other places. And then, 4 years after the first study, a skeleton came out of the ground in the Russian north that gave those other roads a name. The skeleton came from an island in a cold lake in the Russian northwest, a place called Yuzhny Oleni Ostrov, in the region of Karelia, near the border with Finland. It was old, far older than any Viking. When researchers recovered and sequenced its mitochondrial DNA in 2014, they found a lineage roughly 7,500 years old. And when they placed it on the family tree, it landed in a place that should have been impossible. It was a sister to the Icelandic line. Not C1e itself, but its closest known relative, a branch they named C1f, sitting right beside the Icelandic twig on the same small limb of the tree. Understand what that does to the clean story. Until this skeleton surfaced, C1e looked stranded. A lonely American twig with no relatives anywhere near Europe, which made the Native American crossing feel like the only way to explain it. But now there was a cousin, a close cousin, thousands of years old, lying in the ground of northern Eurasia, nowhere near the Americas at all. And a cousin in Russia opens a door that the first study could not fully close. If one branch of this rare family was living in the Eurasian North 7,500 years ago, then perhaps the family was never purely American to begin with. Perhaps these were old Eurasian lineages all along, scattered thin across the top of the world, surviving here and there in tiny numbers, mostly unrecorded because almost no one carries them today. And that reframes the woman in the ship entirely. Follow the alternative. The Vikings did not only sail west, they sailed east, and they sailed it hard. For generations, Norse traders and raiders pushed deep into the rivers of Russia, the men known as the Varangians, threading their shallow ships from the Baltic toward the Black Sea, founding towns, taking captives, moving people and goods across thousands of miles of inland water. They were all over the very region where that ancient skeleton was found. So here is the rival explanation, and it requires no ocean crossing to America at all. A Norse expedition into the east encountered a woman carrying C1e, a lineage that still lingered in northern Eurasia at the time, and carried her home to Iceland the same way they carried so much else. The line then died out everywhere on the European mainland, swallowed by the churn of larger populations over the centuries, and survived only on the isolated island where it had taken root. Same lineage, same arrival around the Viking Age, same 80 descendants today, but a completely different journey from the opposite direction with no Native American in it at all. The believers have a counter to this too. A sister branch in ancient Russia, they point out, does not prove C1e itself was European. Cousins can drift far apart over 7,000 years, and C1e still sits closer to the American side of the family than C1f does. Possibly true. But the damage is done, because the Eastern Road can no longer be dismissed as fantasy. It has a skeleton behind it now. And there is one more thread that refuses to lie flat. As researchers combed the world's genetic databases for any trace of C1e outside Iceland, a handful of unexpected partial matches surfaced in odd corners of Europe, including a fragment reported from Central Europe that lined up with the Icelandic lineage across the stretch of DNA they could compare. A single partial match is not a population, and it may mean nothing at all. But it is exactly the kind of loose thread that keeps the European possibility from being ruled out, exactly the kind of detail an honest accounting cannot quietly set aside. So the same 80 strands of DNA now carry two entirely different histories. In one, a longship returns from a forest coast in the west, a Native American woman aboard. In the other, a raider's boat returns from the rivers of the east, a Eurasian woman aboard, her lineage doomed everywhere but the island. The DNA confirms that a woman came. It cannot, on its own, tell us which ocean she crossed. She has no name. She has no grave. Her only monument is a thread of code, passed hand to hand down 40 generations of mothers to people who carry her without knowing she is there. 3 stories reach back toward her. A woman carried home from a forest coast in the west, 1,000 years before the history books say the two worlds met. A woman taken from the rivers of the east, her lineage doomed everywhere but one island, and the answer no one has measured yet. The science has proven that something extraordinary happened. It has not proven which extraordinary thing. So she waits, the way she has waited for 1,000 years, alive in the blood of strangers, for the one piece of evidence that would finally settle it. A single, ancient skeleton. A single matching sequence. The name of the ocean she crossed.